Lego was supposed to be untouchable. It was one of the most loved brands on Earth. Kids knew the bricks, parents trusted the name, and for decades, Lego had something most companies would kill for. A product so simple, so recognizable, and so endlessly reusable that it felt almost timeless. And still, by the early 2000s, Lego was dangerously close to collapse. Not because people stopped loving Lego, not because the brick stopped working, but because somewhere along the way, the company forgot what made it powerful in the first place. It started chasing more categories, more products, more experiments, more complexity. Theme parks, clothing, media, new shapes, new systems, new ideas stacked on top of each other until the whole thing stopped feeling like a system at all. And that is what makes the Lego story so fascinating. This was not the story of a company that got disrupted from the outside. This was the story of a company that nearly buried itself from the inside. If you like business stories where great brands don't just lose the market, but lose themselves, subscribe. On this channel, we break down how iconic companies rise, drift, collapse, and sometimes find their way back. Lego didn't make just one mistake. They made several. They expanded into theme parks. They launched wave after wave of new product lines. They chased relevance in a changing world. And somewhere in that rush, they lost control of the one thing that had always made Lego special: the system. Until one decision changed everything. Because Lego did come back, but not by becoming more creative, by becoming more disciplined. That's the part most people miss. To understand how Lego nearly collapsed, you have to go back to the beginning. Lego started in Denmark in 1932, founded by Ole Køk Christiansen, a carpenter from Billund. At first, the company made wooden toys, but from the start, the culture was built around a very specific belief in quality. Ole Køk's famous motto was simple: "Only the best is good enough." That line was not just branding, it reflected an obsession with craft, consistency, and durability. And then came the breakthrough. In the 1950s, Lego developed what became its defining idea. Not just a toy, but a system. In 1958, the company patented the stud and tube brick design that gave Lego its famous clutch power. That mattered because Lego was never just about individual pieces. The genius was that every piece belonged to something bigger. A brick bought today could still connect to a brick bought years later. One set was never really one set. It was part of an expandable world. That is the key to the whole story. Lego won because it built a system that rewarded imagination without creating chaos. It gave children freedom, but inside a framework. The brick was simple. The possibilities were endless. And that combination turned out to be unbelievably powerful. Over time, that philosophy built trust. Parents felt they were buying something durable and smart. Children felt they were getting a toy that never really ended. The brick did not expire when the set was finished. It started there. That was Lego's real product. Not plastic, not sets, not even nostalgia. A system of play. And that is exactly why the downfall hurt so much. Because when Lego got into trouble, it was not abandoning a single product. It was abandoning its own logic. For decades, Lego looked like one of those rare companies that had cracked something permanent. It expanded internationally, built an iconic identity, and became so culturally embedded that the brick itself felt almost universal. The company's core idea was strong enough to keep evolving without losing itself. New themes came in, new worlds were introduced. Cities, castles, space, pirates, trains. The product line could grow, but it still felt coherent because it all ran through the same central logic. Every brick connects. That coherence gave Lego something most toy companies never achieve: trust across generations. Parents who had grown up with Lego bought it for their children. The product taught creativity, patience, and problem solving, but it also delivered what businesses care about most: reliability. It was instantly recognizable, difficult to imitate at the same level, and deeply tied to memory. Lego was not just a toy company, it was becoming a cultural institution. And that kind of success can be dangerous, because when a company becomes iconic, it often starts believing its strength lives in the brand alone. That is usually the beginning of drift. Lego looked stable on the outside, loved, global, respected. But the world around it was starting to change. Kids were being pulled toward faster entertainment. Screens became more powerful. Video games were rising. Attention was fragmenting. The toy industry was getting noisier. And suddenly, a company built on patient, tactile, system-based play started to fear it might become old-fashioned. That fear matters, because companies rarely lose themselves when they are arrogant. More often, they lose themselves when they panic. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Lego was asking a real question. How do we stay relevant in a world that is changing faster than we are? That question was fair. The answer was where things went wrong. Instead of doubling down on the power of the brick, Lego began expanding in almost every direction at once. The company moved deeper into theme parks. It experimented with clothing and lifestyle products. It pushed into media. It launched more and more specialized concepts. It tried to compete for attention by multiplying offerings rather than clarifying what only Lego could uniquely do. And this is where the story gets interesting, because from a distance, that strategy can look like innovation. It can sound visionary. It can sound ambitious. It can sound like a beloved brand evolving with the times. But inside the business, it created a very different reality. Complexity exploded. More products meant more design variations. More variations meant more manufacturing strain. More experiments meant more internal confusion. A company that had once been elegant in its logic started becoming messy in its execution. The deeper problem was not just that Lego was trying new things. The deeper problem was that many of those things were no longer reinforcing the core system that had made the company great. They stopped building a system and started building noise. That line is the heart of the episode, because a lot of companies think their enemy is stagnation, so they throw energy at novelty. They celebrate motion. They call it boldness. But complexity has a cost. And if your whole advantage came from coherence, complexity can become lethal. By 2003, the consequences were impossible to ignore. Lego's annual report for that year was brutal. Net sales fell 26% from 11.4 billion Danish kroner to 8.4 billion Danish kroner. The company recorded a pre-tax loss of 1.4 billion Danish kroner. For a brand of Lego stature, that was not a rough patch. That was a crisis. And the worst part was that this was not just about revenue falling. Internally, Lego had become too complicated to manage cleanly. The company had stretched itself across businesses that did not tie back clearly enough to its core strength. The brand still had emotional power, but the business underneath it was losing structural discipline. That distinction is everything. People still loved Lego, but love does not automatically fix operations. Love does not simplify supply chains. love does not make weak strategy coherent. The emotional low point in the Lego story is not that the world rejected the company. It is that the company nearly failed while still being beloved. That is what makes this a deeper kind of business tragedy. The value was still there. The identity was still there. But the execution had become so scattered that the company could no longer translate brand strength into a healthy business. And then came the turning point. Jørgen Vig Knudstorp, who had joined Lego in 2001, took over as CEO in 2004. He was the first non-family CEO in the company's history. That alone symbolized how serious the crisis had become. This was no longer a moment for sentimental continuity. Lego needed someone who could look at the business without romantic blindness and ask a hard question. What actually belongs here? Knudstorp's genius was not that he reinvented Lego. It was that he recognized Lego did not need reinvention nearly as much as it needed subtraction. The company began simplifying aggressively. It cut back complexity. It refocused on the core brick system. It made painful choices about what was truly central and what was distracting management, capital, and attention. One of the clearest signals came with the decision to sell the Legoland parks, which Lego itself explained as a move away from a business area that did not directly tie in with the group's core business. That sentence says everything. The turnaround began when Lego stopped confusing adjacency with necessity. This is the part people often misunderstand. Turnarounds are usually narrated as heroic reinventions. Big vision, big innovation, big new bets. Lego's recovery tells a different story. Sometimes the smartest leadership move is not expansion, it is reduction. Not asking, what else can we become? But asking, what are we really? That refocus gave the company room to rebuild intelligently. Licensing, for example, became powerful when it was integrated into the system rather than layered on top of it. Lego Star Wars worked because it did not fight the core product. It amplified it. The best partnerships and themes made the brick more desirable without breaking the underlying logic of Lego Play. And once the system was restored, growth became possible again. Not chaotic growth, coherent growth. That is a much rarer thing. The recovery did not happen because Lego suddenly became less creative. It happened because the company learned to put creativity inside boundaries again. That is what the original brick had always represented. Freedom inside form. Imagination inside a system. Not random expansion, but meaningful combination. And once Lego returned to that operating logic, it could grow without drowning in its own complexity. That is why the comeback feels so satisfying. It is not just a financial recovery story. It is an identity recovery story. Lego won again when it remembered that its greatest strength was never being everywhere. Its greatest strength was making one system so powerful that it could keep generating new worlds. That is a very different mindset, and it is one of the hardest lessons for successful companies to learn. Because growth creates temptation. Once you are loved, you start thinking the answer is to spread the brand across more surfaces, more categories, more experiments, more proof that you are modern. But more is not always growth. Sometimes more is just dilution. Lego did not come back by innovating more. It came back by remembering what not to do. That is the lesson. Focus is not the enemy of creativity. Focus is what gives creativity force. Without it, energy spills everywhere, complexity grows, Teams get confused. Products stop reinforcing each other. And eventually, a company that looks innovative from the outside starts becoming fragile on the inside. Lego nearly collapsed because it lost respect for its own system. It recovered because it earned that respect back. And that is why this story matters far beyond toys. A lot of companies do not fail because the market stops caring. They fail because, in the panic to stay relevant, they abandon the structure that made them valuable in the first place. Lego's comeback is a reminder that survival is not always about adding more. Sometimes it is about removing everything that should never have been there. Lego came back, not by adding more, but by returning to the system that made it work. Because what made you successful can quietly become what holds you back. And Lego caught it in time. Not every company does. Because while Lego was fixing its foundation, Intel was still winning the old game, while the new one was already being written. That's the next story. Now I want to hear from you. Which founder, company, or rise and fall story should we cover next? Drop your ideas in the comments, and it might just become the next episode of The Founder Files.